Backbase. And with the presentation, Friends Don't Let Friends Test with In-Memory Databases. Warm welcome, please.
Hello, hello. Well, thank you for being here. I know it's the after lunch time, it's the siesta time. I know that in Spanish. So I try to keep the energy up in the room, at least in the part that is an explanation. Then we have some demos later on. Hopefully, you're going to see the value of what we are presenting here. So it's a tool and it's a way of working that started in the company I work with, so Backbase. So I'm Andrés Torres, to start with. I'm a software engineer. Lately, it's more as a Confluence architect and a Slack channel master. So I'm basically talking and writing things more than coding later on. But well, I was living in Amsterdam for a while. My company is Dutch. Then I moved to London in the UK, and now Brexit, COVID, etc. Back home with the kids and enjoying the beautiful world of having grandparents helping you with the kids, so you can actually go for dinner and having lunch without staying at home the whole day. So yeah, you have the social networks. Well, we can interact today, of course, and tomorrow. But if you want to ping me later on, you have the Twitter, which is normally what I'm mostly active on. Backbase, well, we are one of the sponsors, so we have a booth there. You probably saw it, or if you didn't see it, go visit. I work there as the director of backend. So we have several guilds on technology, so we have backend, frontend, etc., and dealing with the backend part. We are building software for banks with the good things and the bad things. I've been working with banks all my career, also with the good things and the bad things. But well, Backbase, we are a specific workplace is the fintech. I led you a couple of links there, the engineering blog, and also, well, if you're looking for opportunities, we are also here in Poland. We are growing a lot. We also have in Amsterdam, so you can take a look at the open positions. And well, this is a talk about testing, to be honest, but so mostly it's to be testing. We're gonna see it from the backend point of view, but well, I'm stalling a quote from Alan Hobup about, well, architecture is a skill, not a role. We've been saying that in our company. I have some colleagues here that they hear me saying this for a while. And also I say that about the testing. Like testing is something that the whole team need to be involved. Quality is, everybody needs to be involved in quality. It's not something that our QA engineers should do or our testers should do on isolation. And for that, there are many tools out there that can help us to test our software properly. And one of the things we wanted to do, I'm going to see now how, is shifting some of this testing to the left. So moving some of the testing we were doing in higher environments later down the road, move it to the earlier stages, almost at unit testing. So similar to what you see with contract testing for the APIs, we had a similar approach for databases. So well, as a small story about how I discovered what I'm going to talk now, how I present it in the company, etc. So back in 2015, what I call the happy days, I had no kids. So I now have 2 small kids, so my life is now mostly chaotic. I have time for almost nothing, but then they also have good things. But basically, it was a different life living in London with my girlfriend, no kids. It was a different time. Brexit was not a thing yet, so we were also living in London happily, no issues with you need to leave, you need to get a visa, whatever. We were just living there, enjoying the city. Trump was only a TV guy, so like, okay, what a harm, it cannot be harmful. That is a crazy guy in the TV, what can happen? Now, later on we saw that other things happened with this guy. Real Madrid had only 10 Champions Leagues, so that's to give some perspective. I know Robert Lewandowski, maybe you guys are now more into Football Club Barcelona. Sorry, Nacho, our friend from Barcelona. But I'm a Madrid supporter, and well, back in the day it was only 10. Now we are 14 from the last year, so that's also back in 2015. And the only pandemic the world knew at the time was the reggaeton music. So, but then a lot of things happened. But back in the day I was working in London. I was working for a customer, a bank, building a business banking project, and I met a guy called Richard North. At that time, well, he was working for a consultancy company using our product to build the solution for the customer. So we were interacting every day. And then he mentioned to me that he has a project in GitHub that he was trying. He was using Docker for testing to spin up some databases back in the day, but now it's almost everything that you can run in a Docker container. take a look at the project. It has like 5 stars in GitHub. So like, take a look, put it in favorite. Maybe it can be useful at some point. And then we're going to see now that TestContainers has been a long journey in the last 7 years. Well, another thing that why this talk is related to databases is, without saying any bad words, basically that's what we do, at least in our company. We put things in, we put things out of the database. That's this guy is saying 80%, I will say 90-something% in our case. Do it properly is another thing, but the job is basically that. REST API on top of a database, put things in and out. That's the job. So our context, so what's the problem in our company? So we are building software for the banks, but the banks already have an infrastructure. So our software needs to work in an ecosystem. Now we are moving towards handling our own SaaS model, so it will be a different picture for my company from now on. But as today and the previous years when we introduced this, it was we need to support several databases. Normally the banks go with the big guys, so Oracle, SQL Server with Microsoft, also MySQL. We needed to support, back in the day, SQL Scripts, because the banks didn't want any kind of services creating things in the database, not Flyaway, no Liquibase, so we needed to produce pure SQL so the DBA can do their job and get paid. Then some of the new banks started to look for maybe something more cloud-friendly, so we introduced Liquibase. And we need to test all that. Make sure that before we release it, we know that all the combinations work. So this database with scripts, this database with Liquibase, all that combination. So it was a little bit of a pain to go to environments, create the databases, and then execute all of our E2E testing against each one of the databases. Also, money-wise, it was not cheap. So yeah, what possibilities do we have? So most of the teams, I'm going to demo that later on, most of the teams we use, our stack is Spring, Java, Spring Boot. So most of the guys were using H2, which is the default to test the repositories and to verify that the queries were correct, etc. That's fine. I mean, works in memory, super fast to verify some things. But it's not accurate to verify all the scenarios. Not everything that you can do in H2 covers all the things that you have available in Oracle or SQL Server or the different versions of MySQL. As we're going to see later, there are some drawbacks. Different data types, things that are not covered in H2 per se. You have add-ons that you can put on H2, so they mimic Postgre and other things, but well, it can be problematic and you can be missing things and you will discover later on in the environment. So we were using it, but we were having issues, and then we're going to demo some later on. You can have a real database instance and test everybody pointing to that, share one. But that's, yeah, it's the same as the production database because it's another instance that you have for everybody, but initial state is not going to be the same. You cannot be deleting things because maybe I'm deleting you or your data. So it was also problematic to share, even within a team. So there's also the option of having a real database instance, but per developer. So if you have a team of 4 building things, they will have their own instance of the database in a dev environment, test environment, etc. But that's, again, 100% compatibility. You can destroy it and start fresh every single time, but that costs money, of course. And then they will need to have all these tasks to maintain the status of the database, to clean up, to export, import, all that stuff. So that was the option we had. And then we wanted, extracting from all those options, what will be the ideal scenario. Like if we can tie, similar to what you have in H2, that you tie the database lifecycle to the test lifecycle, that's an ideal setup. It's managed by the build, so you create it and destroy it, ending up with the build. It needs to be identical as much as possible, or preferably identical to the production database that we use. In this case, we were using more than one, so we needed to replicate the testing in different databases. So that's what we wanted, and there was no solution before we discovered this solution to match all these 3. That tool, that was the creator we saw it earlier, Richard Knott. It was the first version of TestContainer. It was 3 images. They were supporting Postgre, MySQL, and I think Nginx. So that's the first release they did in the GitHub project was like that. So it's a library. We're going to see the Java flavor of it, being this JDD makes sense, but we're going to see that there is a flavor of TestContainers for Node, for Scala, for Go. The community is growing because everybody sees the value on this kind of testing. So it has compatibility with the frameworks, the most common frameworks there, JUnit, Spock, others. And nowadays, because the community grew a lot and they basically added everything you can run in a Docker container is there. You can run Selenium tests, you can run almost everything. So we're going to see the database part, But you can have a Kafka Docker container to test that part. You can spin up almost everything that can run in Docker. You can run it with TestContainers. And this is what we wanted to achieve in Backbase. So we were having, well, instead of doing the normal pyramid, I went for a different diagram, but you know the drill, right? Like unit testing, component testing, you need to test with other systems, E2E, visual test kind at the end. So the idea is that some of these you can run them locally, and then others you need environments for. And that was our setup, basically. So we were running like this, and then databases, APIs, tests with other systems, all that was happening in an environment, or multiple environments in this case. And that was cost us a lot of money. The environments creation was not as fast, so you need to wait for environments. You forget to destroy the environment, then you're paying more money that month, blah, blah. So what we wanted to do was move the database testing shift left. So move it earlier in the process so you can detect issues earlier, you can verify earlier, etc. If you're familiar with the contract testing, is the same you're trying to achieve with contract testing, like moving it earlier so you verify that everything works without going to an environment. This is the same for databases. So moving that piece to the local time, local machine build time testing. And of course, because you are using Docker containers, some of the databases take longer than H2 to start, but it's still something you can do in your local setup. As we're going to see, we're going to run some tests, and you're going to see that the time spent in the test is not that long. So TestContainers Java is the one we're going to see in deep. 7 years ago, as we mentioned, back in the happy days. Now you see, well, and probably that picture is old. They have, I don't know how many stars these days. So when I first market as favorite, it really was like 5 stars, and you see that how the community exploded around this tool. It's on top of the Docker Java API, integrates with multiple frameworks. We're going to see most of the examples here with JUnit, but they have some integrations with Quarkus, with Spring, etc. They detect your Docker installation by default. You don't need to do anything. It's going to run your Docker setup, and also everything that is spin up at the beginning is going to disappear after your test is gone. So the cleanup happens for you. You don't need to start and stop containers yourself. As I mentioned, we're in Java here, so we're talking about the Java one, but you have it for many other frameworks. And this started later after the Java one, but it's getting a lot of traction. Especially I follow the one about Go, etc. It's really getting there, and you can use it in any other languages. If you are developing in something apart from Java, you can take a look at those. So now I wanted to demo some of the things we discussed and other things that we do in the company on top of TestContainers. So first we're going to go for the basic stuff, which is testing databases using this. If you attended the previous talk in this room about TDD, there was a sneak peek about how to run a unit test spinning up a Postgre in that case. So it was running and everything was connected to a real database, but in your local. We're going to do something similar here. And then we're going to see how we do other extras in the company. So we also produce database documentation using TestContainers. We have a way of running our local development using Spring, a way of developing Spring. We're going to see you have tomorrow a talk about Quarkus from an expert from the team. So I'm not going to get there, but I'm going to show you a small thing you can do in Quarkus that is basically running your Quarkus application without configuring anything. By default, it's going to detect you want the database, and it's going to spin it up for you. That, behind the scene, is using TestContainers. We're going to do a similar example with Spring. It's still not included in Spring by default, in Spring Boot, but they have a pull request open to actually have it like that. And then the last part, if the internet allows me, the TestContainers team, they created a company now. It's called Atomic Jar. Maybe you know about it. And they have a flavor of TestContainers that is running in the cloud. So I'm going to disable Docker in my machine. So without having Docker enabled, I'm going to run all the tests, well, some of the tests that I'm going to be running now. And all of them are going to work the same by going to the cloud, executing there in the environments they have, and bring me the results back, if the internet allows me. If not, you're going to need to trust me that that's possible. And you can apply, they have it as a preview, so you can apply from your company point of view. They are happy to show you, and they have a Slack channel where they're really useful. I don't work for TestContainers. We love the tool in the company. We use it a lot. We are sponsors in GitHub. But, well, I know some of the guys personally after being users for a while, so they are really friendly in the community. So the first thing I want to show is what we mentioned. You can use H2, of course, super fast, and it's going to cover most of the use cases you have. But it can give you false positives also, or the sense of yeah, it's working, but when you really go to an environment with an existing database or a specific version, it's not going to work. We had a real use case in our company. We were supporting MySQL 5.7. We wanted to move to MySQL 8. Some of the tables we have the naming changed. The naming was more restrictive in MySQL 8, and our test it started to fail in the environments. So the teams, everything was green at the level when they were testing. When they moved to some environments, they started to see errors. So we're going to see that example now. So let me open IntelliJ and run some tests here. So in here, I'm going to show one example that is running with H2 and another one running with TestContainers. In this case, against MySQL 8. So this one is the, I hope you can see it properly. So it's a normal Spring Boot application, REST API connected to a database. We are testing in the slice mode, so it's not the whole Spring context, it's just the persistence layer. We have a repository, we're saving an entity, etc. So with this default, H2 is going to be the one executing. So in this case, we are doing the simplest way you can do to add test containers to your application. You don't even need to add any code. We're going to see later on, but now if we run this test, it's going to, well, we can run it from here or from the terminal. This is going to work because it's an H2. We're going to see that it starts, and then we're going to see the entity. Well, okay. The equals fails. Okay. But this is the entity, and the name of the table is groups. All works. All the queries about finding all, etc. Everything works. So no issues there. If we run the same test, but using MySQL, so you need to disable H2. You're familiar with the Spring Boot, these annotations, you need to disable H2 this way. If you run the same test now, it's doing everything is the same, it's going to fail. Because MySQL 8 has new reserved words that were not there in 5.7. One is groups, they also have rank, and I think others. So we had a table called groups in one of our services, and that table was what's failing. No. Sorry. I need to add the test container piece. So we're not using Docker Desktop in my company. We use Colima. I know you're familiar with it. And for that, you need to enable some environment variables. If you use Docker Desktop, everything works straight away. So it's trying to connect and download the Docker image. But I have them locally because I didn't trust the internet. But let's see if it's going to pick them up. Not that it's going to stop the Docker and start it again. I'm going to try with my phone, just in case. But they should have. So of course, the first time you run any of these tests, if you don't have the image locally or you're in your CDCI environment, it's going to download it. But the rest of the attempts are gonna follow that image. If you are running multiple tests, you can reuse. We're going to see later on, there are different life cycles, so you can reuse between tests, you can reuse between methods, you can even keep it alive if you want to do some investigation later on. So I'm restarting the Docker tool that we use, and hopefully this time it's going to run. Let's see now. Looks better. So now at some point it will need to explode, telling me like, yeah, you cannot use groups in MySQL 8, basically. So So you see that it's trying to pull the image. It's still suffering to download it. Let's see if I can change the version of the image. We're going to explain now how this is working just by modifying this JDBC URL. But well, it's just the idea was to show the error when you do the real testing again a real database because you're using a reserved word. Let's see if it actually can run or not. It's not really connecting to. Trying to pull the image. It should be local already because we were downloading it before. Oh, well, let's move to the next one. We still need to do more running. Hopefully it's gonna. So when we are able to run the test, we will see that it's failing. So any developer will detect that the problem is there without going to any environment, create any database in AWS or any other place. So it will improve the developer experience because they will be able to find things without going through the pull request, deploying an environment, etc. The way that you can work with test containers are several ways. So if you're using JUnit extensions, it's adding an annotation there. So the life cycle is binded to the JUnit test. So you put an annotation on top, test containers. And then to create a container is basically an annotation there. You can create MySQL container. They have plenty of flavors, Postgre, Oracle, SQL Server, and outside databases, Kafka, etc. You can also run a generic container. So there is a class called generic container where you can just point to any Docker image that you know. Can be your own custom services in your company, so you can run tests between different services, etc. And then to bind that to your application, you can do it with a dynamic property source. So you have the configuration from Spring. You will obtain the values from the container that is up there. So a URL in your local machine, a port, all the configuration, and it's going to be binded. So when your application runs, it's going to execute against that database. So you have, well, the two main annotations that you need are there. And then, well, how you set up with the properties. There is another way, which is the one I was trying to show for the first example, which is the simplest you can do, which is adding the only thing you need to do is add the dependencies. So you need to add the libraries from TestContainers, but then the only thing you need to do is to touch the JDBC URL. Here we are mixing what we were saying, like depending if you declare it static or not, you will be sharing between test methods or we share and we will create it and delete it after each method, depending on how your testing goes, if you are concatenating results one of each other, etc. Of course, if you need to start and stop the database between stages, it's going to take longer, but you can choose your flavor. And you can mix them because here we are using databases, but you can have a database and a queue, Kafka, you can have Rabbit, you can run multiple things here, but well, today we're talking about the databases part. And even you can reuse a database. So if you create an abstract class and all your tests inherit from that class, all your tests will be using the same database instance. So that will be the fastest approach because you start the database once and then you reuse it across all your testing suite. But you will need to make sure that the data is valid from one test to the other, etc. So it will not really be isolated one test to the other. But depending on your scenario, maybe you want to reuse for the speed. If you're looking for speed, this is the best approach. So you can see it's a dummy example, and then if you have multiple API repositories, they can all extend from the database test, so all of them will reuse that database. And this is the simplest way to introduce test containers in your application for the database point of view. So if you have the test containers libraries in your POM, in your dependencies, in Gradle or in Maven, the only thing you need to do without modifying any of your tests, without touching any of the code, is to change your JDBC URL and introduce this TZ, test containers, in the middle of JDBC and whatever database you are testing to. The rest of the part, it doesn't matter, the username, the password, all is going to be managed by the lifecycle automatically for you. So if you want to test with a different version, you only need to change the version there. So instead of MySQL 8.24, you can change it to 37. You can just put MySQL 8, whatever. If there is a Docker image with that tag, it's going to find it, create it behind the scenes, and put it up for you, running all your tests and set it down. No code, no annotations in your test. The only thing you need to do is add the annotation there. The part of the hostname, port, and database will be ignored. So you don't need to set it up, but well, to keep the structure is there. And then, well, that's the part from Spring, which I wanted to, let's see if I can give it a go now. I'm going to restart this again. And then the next example is for Quarkus. So as we mentioned, in Quarkus, you have something called dev services. Again, there is a talk tomorrow from Roberto. You can check that. He's going to go into way more details than me for sure. But if you have played with Quarkus and you download the basic sample from Quarkus from the website, you're going to build a small REST API. If you don't configure anything in that application, so this is coming from, I actually updated this one yesterday. So it's the to-do application from Quarkus. I updated to the latest version available. So this is the default, and it's creating a small REST API to create a to-do list. So it's a to-do and a resource. That's it. So the REST API is post and the database part. If you don't configure anything at all, so I comment it out because this is recent. In the past, I was testing locally. But if you don't put any configuration, but you have a dependency with, in this case, is Postgre, so the driver of the database driver is Postgre, Quarkus is going to interpret, okay, you want a database, but you don't know what it is. So basically, they're going to spin up a database behind the scenes for you, and it's going to connect your application to that database, so your application is going to be fully functional, but not against an in-memory, not a real database in a Docker container. And that's happening because they included test containers inside of the dev tools. So if we go to run it here, let's see if this one works. Sorry, let's zoom here a little bit. So to run the dev tools of Quarkus, you just need to do the Quarkus dev. So in this case, it's working. The image was locally there, so you can see that they started the Postgre database. And now if I test this application, which is, well, we can with, I think it was to-do. Yeah, so that one is returning a list of to-dos, which is empty. We create one, we get it again, so it's there. And it's connecting to a database that is running in my local. So if I do docker ps, there is a Postgre 14 running there. And I did nothing. I configured nothing. I just got the Quarkus example, and I said, I'm going to use the database, but I don't care what it is running. I'm not going to point to an environment or to a local thing, and they do it for you. In Spring, they are trying to do the same. So there is a pull request open in the Spring framework that maybe they're going to add it, but I don't think they're going to touch it until they move to Spring Boot 3, Spring 6. But they have it there to mimic the user experience that you get from here. So let me stop this one. And we're going to see, I hope it's going to work, because now it looks like the Quarkus went well. How you can achieve that today until they merge that pull request, how you can achieve that in Spring. So sometimes in the Spring applications, when we want to work locally, we spin up a Docker database. So how you can do that using test containers so you don't need to run it as a separate thing. So we have an example here. In the test part, we created this abstraction. which is how to run the, well, it's running the MySQL container and it's connecting, so it's passing the properties to the application. We can use that in the test, like we do. So here in the test, we have, well, our integration testing using this. Database test, etc. But what if we can run our application also? So the normal running my application, but behind the scenes is going to spin up the database for me and connect to that. So using this test, I have this test book application. So of course, in my source code, I have my main Spring Book application, this one. But instead of running this, if I run this one, that's, as you can see in the main, is executing my application plus initializing the database. If I run this one, the test boot application, it's going to run my Spring Boot application, and behind the scene is going to do something similar to what you get with Quarkus. It's going to spin up a Docker image with the database that I choose, in this case MySQL, and it's going to connect to that. So I can play with my Spring application locally by executing one command only, or running one class, instead of Docker first and then run my Spring Boot application. If I want to run against something more realistic. So you can see that, well, it's trying to pull the image again, so that's not going to, well, looks like the internet is better now. So this is the first time. If I run the same test now, it's going to go faster, but the first time you need to download images, so it takes longer. Connects to the database, and then it's my normal Spring Boot application, but instead of running against S2, or I need to run a database, it's all in one command. So again, they are planning to add this to improve the developer experience in Spring, but it's not there yet. But with that small trick, running that application that way, you can get the same effect. As you can see, well, it's generating everything with Liquibase, etc. But at the end, it's going to be a fully functional application against a real database. More things I wanted to demo. So as the Quarkus example, another thing that we do in our company is to document the database automatically. So for a while, well, I cannot lie, to be honest. Some of our teams still document the databases manually, but we are trying to get all the teams to do it this way. So there is a tool called SchemaSpy that basically what it does is you give this tool a database to connect to, and it's going to extract an HTML flavor of your database, so you can navigate, you can search, you're going to have fancy diagrams with the relationship. It's a super cool tool. You can run it, it's a jar, so you can get that jar, connect to a database, and you have it. So it's not really difficult to execute like that. But we went to the next level because we love TestContainers that much, etc. One of our teams created a setup that is running everything in TestContainers. So you run the database in TestContainers, you execute our SQL scripts against that database, so our databases get created, and then another container with SchemaSpy that they have available in Docker Hub. You connect to the database, and it's extracting that index, that HTML with an index that then you can load, and it's a website showing you your database configuration, etc. It's all automated. You can do it in every pull request. You can do it in every build. So together with releasing your software, you can release your database documentations automatically without not human intervention. So I'm going to show you, well, the tool is here. If you're curious, yeah, SchemaSpy. This is how it looks like. So this is a demo they have in their website showing how it looks like. So you have nice things like the relationships, so you can see the connections of all that. It's all generated automatically. You can tweak the styling, you can modify things, but you don't need to touch anything if you don't want. So the way we have it in our company is we can generate the database documentation for all the microservices we have. We have more than 60 these days. Well, for the sake of the demo time, etc., I'm going to show it only in a couple of services. So the way this is set up is like, again, starting the database, executing our Liquibase on top of it, generating the database, SchemaSpy extracts the diagrams, and then you have all your diagrams available in this folder in the target. So you see you have here CSS, etc., but there is a lovely index here that contains the database documentation of that particular service. And we're going to generate it for a couple of them. Just for this, you see here 2 of them. So here is the test. It's a text executing test. So, well, it's a functionality from JUnit. It's a little bit fancy, but it's functionality that you have from JUnit 5, so nothing that is not there documented. So let's run this. Hopefully all the images are local, so we don't need to go to the internet again. So the idea is that the teams until now, they were creating the database documentation manually. Like, we have a new column, let me add it to the docs, and this is the type that we have, and this is the default value, blah, blah. With this one, they not need to, whatever changes they do in the SQL or in the Liquibase setup is reflected in those diagrams automatically. So we have a website when we have our API documentation, etc. Now we're going to have also the database documentation that you can navigate as a customer, you can search, etc., etc. So the images there looks like, because you start in the container. In this case, we are creating the documentation of 2 services. We can do it for all the ones we have in the company in a central place, but well, every team is in charge of their own documentation, so they will be building one themselves. And again, this is the output. So if I open this index in a browser, you're going to see, well, you see that it's similar to the one they have online, but well, with our own databases. So you can see the constraints, you can see the relationships here. This diagram is really useful for our customers. You can search in the tables for whatever name. You can search in the columns if you're looking for a particular column. All that is included by default with the SchemaSpy, so the teams need to do nothing apart from executing and generating. It's also giving you, if you have anomalies of things they think is an error, they also show here, etc. So that's another thing we use TestContainers for, to generate the documentation. And the last thing I wanted to show, still have 5 minutes, so it's what I mentioned. It is an open source project. You can use it as an open source like we use, but they created a company out of that. It's Atomic Jar. So you can follow them. And what they do is basically they run environments for you, so you don't need to run anything local. You go to the cloud, the tests run there, and come back. So yeah, if your laptop is overwhelmed by what you're running, if you have hardware limitations, if you're using fancy new Mac laptops that they don't run with the new architecture or all architectures, ARM images, all that pain is gone because you're going to be running everything in your local. You don't need to have Docker. Sometimes because we work with banks, we have these problems that the developers from the banks, they don't have root or admin access in the laptop. They cannot install Docker by strange policies they have in the banks, etc. So they are not able to use this. But we use it for free for now because it's a preview. But if you get the services from them, you can have access to it, and it will be solving the problem. So you have to download the application. It is connected now. So it looks like internet is back, so maybe the demo is going to work. So I'm going to stop any Docker running that I can have. So let me see Docker PS. Yeah, they're saying that I don't have any Docker running. So the test should fail, because if you don't have any Docker, TestContainers tell you that you cannot run anything. So let's do the Quarkus one, for example. We know that at least that one was working. It's going to work the same. The only difference you're going to notice in the logs, and I think in this one shows the same, is that basically you are not using your local environment, you are using a cloud environment for it. And in some cases, it's even faster. So this one is already running. No, they couldn't find a Docker environment. So maybe the connection is not that. Let's restart the connection to see if it fits, and maybe try a different example. Maybe this one. So if it works, normally what you see is your environment. So in this case, it's going to show like Alpine Linux or whatever you are running. If you can see this one, you see it already here. So this, in the previous examples, it was showing like details about my laptop because it was running in my laptop. Now you can see that it's saying something like a number and TestContainers cloud. Means that everything is running. So I have no Docker installed, as you saw, Docker PS, nothing is there. It's running in the cloud. So everything is downloaded in the cloud, and it's running there, and when I finish, I have nothing. I still have no Docker. I have no 37 gigabytes of Docker images in my laptop because I forgot to Docker prune every now and then. So this is quite cool. And in some scenarios, well, depending on connection, of course, but if you have proper connection, normally it's faster. Because the places, where they have this is a machine in the cloud, fully focused on running Docker images, super tuned to be, in fact, they have I don't know if you can see it from here, but they have a turbo mode. So it can even go faster, but if you click there, it says, ask us about it, because it's still in preview. But they are optimizing this so your test, so if you're running this, maybe for your local setup, it doesn't matter. Well, if you have issues with compatibilities, etc., it matters. But imagine environments when you have your CDCI, your Jenkins running already in a Docker container. Some people have Jenkins in a Kubernetes cluster, so you will have the problem of Docker in Docker, which you can solve somehow, but well, you cannot forget about all that because your tests will run. So Jenkins is going to go to the cloud, get your results, and move on. So it's a cool setup. We don't have it. Well, we use it as a preview, but we don't have it in our CDCI. But well, I wanted to show that, but well, it's up to you. But you can ping them. They give you normally preview access for a while, so play with it. And in some demos, I actually use only the cloud instead of my local, because normally it goes faster. Today, because of internet, I didn't want to risk it, but I wanted to show you at the end. So that's basically it. I wanted to cover what we do, how it was helping us to detect issues early on. Now that the things are working, maybe we can see the first attempt of running the mistake of MySQL 8 and the invalid name. So here, let's give it a go. If not, you can trust me, we had that error. Groups is not allowed in MySQL 8. So this baby. Now it should run against the one in the cloud. Because, well, maybe not, because I still have this. Why we started with this? Because creating environments was painful, so we wanted something closer to the development lifecycle. We discovered the tool, we started to use it, and now we are using it for almost everything. Because we also produce the database documentation. We are also doing all the testing. We are using for acceptance testing. So I think it failed, I hope, for the right reason, and not something else. What it is? No. I think it couldn't connect to the database, it's saying. Oh, well. We use it for more things. We use it for acceptance testing, using Cucumber and other things. We use it for testing different queues because we also support Kafka, Rabbit, ActiveMQ. So anything that runs in Docker, you can use it. This one doesn't want to run today. And again, yeah, producing database documentation, etc. We find it really useful. Moving that closer to the developers will help us to go faster, to fix issues earlier. So that's the tool. I hope you like it. Sorry for some of the issues with the internet, etc. But well, if you have any questions about the tool or what we do, just ping me later around here or in the social networks, in Twitter, etc. I wanted to say one more thing, like thanks to the organization for the invite. I will share everything well, I think you have it also internally in the app, but well, I will share also in my Twitter account. And thanks, yeah, for the organization for bringing here and a nice time in Krakow these 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrés.